Hello and welcome to the latest edition of Track Coach Clubhouse. I'm Andy Poppleton, a sprints and hurdles coach from Tunbridge AC, and I'm joined by Mark Hookway.
Hello everyone.
Hello Mark.
Hello.
So Mark, today I was hoping to have a quick chat about competition. It's been a funny old year with COVID and everything, and yeah, a very different sort of season. So it'll be worth chatting through what your experience has been, and maybe lessons you've learned, and things like that, and what you might take forward into the future. So how has 2020 been competition wise for you?
Well, I guess if you go back to the start of lockdown, I know in conversations with you, quite a few of us were, I don't know what the odds would have been. What odds would you have put on it being any competition on the track and field this summer? Quite low at one stage, I would have said, wouldn't you?
Yeah, I was thinking we might get some sort of internal club competition type thing, and that would be about it at best.
Yes. So the way I've looked at it, we've got a lot more than we ever thought possible. And so we started with virtual racing on the distance running side using GPSs, and of course everyone was quite excited. At least we're going to be able to do something, and people did do something. And then whether it was a conscious effort by some or just subconsciously, people found routes that favoured them in particular areas, with either wind assisted on the coast or with a gale behind them, or little loops around housing estates which didn't accurately reflect on a GPS the distances run. So that was all quite amusing. And I went from great enthusiasm, oh thank goodness we're going to be able to do some sort of competition using those methods, to completely disinterested in those spaces. So that and a huge awareness that people are slaves to Strava and their GPS watches. Well, I'm sorry to burst people's bubbles, but what a load of rubbish it is now, isn't it? It's a nice guide, but it's pretty meaningless in terms of real competition. And I think then we got to a stage where, from a sprint's point of view, you guys can race in a straight line in alternate lanes, but for 800 meters, you could do an 800 meters in alternate lanes, running the whole 800 with a staggered start. That was something didn't appeal to many people that I was involved with, but there were some races, and fair play to a few people that did it. And at that stage, there was a few coming out and running personal bests, which was quite interesting. Pretty much time trialing it. So there was a bit of that. And then the big one was when England Athletics said, no, you can have races as normal, up to 3,000 meters with 6 in a race. And then suddenly, back in August, you were able to do some sort of normal racing, even though with limited fields. So it's been quite a change for everybody. But I think in general, and there's been a split, hasn't there, both coaches and athletes, between those that prepared and wanted to give some track a go, and others that just thought, no, I won't bother. Yeah, we're going to miss it. So it's been fascinating, and there's no right or wrong way. I mean, Dina Asher-Smith's a classic. She's done some locally key club races, hasn't she? But completely avoided the international circuit, whereas others have come out all guns blazing and done, some incredible performances, in world records and things have happened. So it's been a year that's caused diversity in all sorts of ways.
Absolutely. It's as you were saying, I was very sceptical early on whether we'd have much, and I think it has been interesting. I think it was quite interesting how right from the start, a lot of coaches that seemed to sort of divide them as to whether they just sort of wrote off the year entirely, or whether they were sort of just going to try and keep things ticking along, keeping sort of not too far away from competition, so that they could then sort of have their athletes move into doing some when they're ready. And I was actually on a webinar with a bunch of sprint coaches organised by England Athletics, and this is sort of being discussed on there, will you have athletes racing on this year? And there was I mean, it wasn't quite 50-50, but there was certainly an awful lot that had already decided, relatively early on, that they just weren't going to have their athletes race this year. But no, I think the thing that has been really interesting for me has been how well athletes have done. With so little warning that we were actually going to be having traditional races, because it was quite late. It was quite short notice from that announcement coming to the first races being put on, which is a good thing. I'm pleased that those races came along, but it's not a huge amount of time to transition from sort of one training phase to another. But then also just in terms of how well they've done given how few races they've had. Actually, I was doing sort of comparison to last year, and so one of my athletes, he's probably the highest performing short sprinter in the group. And last year, across the season, there were 14 weekends of competition. Now, a lot of those there'll been double rounds, or they've been doing a 1 and a 2 or something like that, or maybe a relay as well. But there were 14 separate weekends on which he was competing, and it was it took a while to get up to a kind of a really racing at its peak in that. And it was right towards the end that we actually got there. This time round, he had three weekends of racing, and has just come out flying straight away, and has been setting PBs, big PBs, despite that interrupted prepreration. Now, some of that hopefully is just because of progress that's happened over the year anyway, not just
coaching.
I'd like to think it has helped to some extent, but I think what it's sort of shown is he really didn't need that much this year to get ready. And I think a big part of it was maybe just the fact that when that peak came, in terms of the calendar year, it was actually pretty similar. It's just we'd missed all that early stuff, because that was the other big thing I noticed in terms of the difference between this year and last. The duration of the season, from the first of my athletes to race this year, was the 9th of August, and the last was the 18th of September. And that wasn't the same one, so that everybody had a shorter window than that. Looking at it last year, the first race we were looking at the 13th of April with the Southern League, and again running through until sort of the start of September. Yeah. And it's really made me think. As much as I want to support things like the Southern Leagues and the club's appearance in those, am I doing my athletes a bit of a disservice by putting them out to race in April?
Yeah, yes. And I do feel for you, sprinters, if you're a sprinter, you basically can run the 100 and 200, can't you? Yeah. And that's it. In a relay. With the distance runners, we've got options. There's road races going on all the time over a variety of distances. In April, you could be running 5K, 10K on the road relays or whatever it might be. And then you've got 800, 1500, 3K, 5,000, 10,000, steep trail, whatever. You've got so many more options to mix and match. And even during a meeting, we've had people as part of their preparation running an 800 who aren't 800 metre runners, they're steeplechasers or 5,000 metre runners, and then tempoing a 5,000 later, a good pace, but you're not going flat out. You're not that worried about the final result because you're doing it partly for training. Not so easy to do that with sprints because you've got to go flat out and you've got to get a good start. You can't hold back quite, and hurdles as well. I mean, I think you said to me, it's very difficult to hurdle at 80% and it mean anything. You've got to go to really work the systems and your technique to the full extent. You've got to go at full tilt. Maybe 400 hurdles you can relax a bit, but the options available, it seems to me, for sprint and field. I mean, having said that on field, I mean, Mondo Duplantis has shown field events as you can compete pretty regularly. I mean, I don't know how many competitions he's done this year. He's travelled around Europe. He's been on a non-stop European tour and set the highest ever outdoors height last week, didn't he? So
yeah, Yeah.
It's interesting.
I know it's been a great season for pole vault, really, hasn't it? Because it's with him and Sam Kendricks. So just a brilliant rivalry there, and I think kind of looking forward to seeing how they sort of push each other in the years to come. But
mentality there. I mean, they started it off for everybody in track and field, didn't they? Really, with some sort of proper competition with their in different continents doing the Garden Challenge.
Yeah,
with their Poppleton, and that was that sort of mentality. That they seem willing to take each other on at every opportunity. There's a rivalry, but it's a respectful rivalry where they support each other a little bit as well, and they seem to be in it. Perhaps they realise that pole vault doesn't necessarily get all the attention as other events do, quite so much. And this was their chance to promote their part of the sport, if you like. And they've almost taken on that responsibility in a really good way. And people watching athletics will be very aware of the pole vault, perhaps more so after this season than ever.
I agree. And the thing is, obviously, we talked about Mondo and Sam there on the men's side, but on the women's as well. Sandy Morris has done an awful lot in competitions in the US as well. I've been watching her on Instagram, her vault built in her back garden and things. Which it's I wish I had a garden big enough to do that. But
that's another thing actually that they've shown us in a big way, because that is quite remarkable to be able to put a pole vault runway in your garden or whatever. But it's been able to adapt, isn't it? It's something I've spoken a bit about this week with people, not just athletics, but in life, that you can either, you've got a choice, haven't you, when you're faced with this sort of period, the virus or whatever it might be, or difficulty with work. You either doom and gloom, see all the negatives, sink into your shell, or you stop and reflect and you think, right, okay, what are the positives I'm going to be able to take out of it? What can I do to adapt, to make the best of a bad situation? All these things that we've never been put under quite this scrutiny. It's similar with schools at the moment. Everyone says how hard done by they all are. But, it's the first thing the society's had to face probably since the World War in quite this way. And that was, I don't know how many times, much more tragic and challenging. And maybe it's a good thing that we've all, you might as well give up if you're just going to, not adapt. And it's a good lesson to everybody.
Yeah, no, I suppose with the schools and things, you think it's one of the completely just come from a family of teachers, so I should disclose that sort of conflict of interest. I have an awful lot of sympathy for teachers and things, but given that class sizes are one of the biggest complaints, it's we've got an opportunity now for kids to be learning in smaller bubbles. So potentially that's hopefully we can take some of the benefits of that forward into the future. I don't know, but
I think also perhaps touching, leading on from that, it's probably a period where athletes and non-athletes, people are talking more openly about how they're feeling about life, because we're all in it together. And that's probably, I'd like to think that's a good thing, that, and, again, thinking positively, most people's problems, compared to the great scheme of things are pretty small fry, normal life, compared to what we've been through this year for a lot of people. So, it does put things into perspective quite a lot. So it gives, I think people have had to think more outside the box, adapt more, think about the mentality towards their sport than ever.
Yeah, I think on the competition side of things specifically, I think one thing that's been really good to come out of all of this is it's because of the need to control numbers. I think it has put a lot more systems in place and around sort of organising events in the first place. Because don't get me wrong, I can understand there's an appeal to sort of the open meets where you just sort of turn up, and having that ease of access to the sport, particularly for somebody that's maybe new to it. but I've got to admit, I've been to so many of those open meets on sort of a weekday night that you end up, you don't know whether the last race of the night is going to be going off at 8 o'clock or at 9:30, because you've got no idea how many people are going to be arriving to the races earlier on, and the timetables that are published are kind of best guess, and that's about it. And it's been really nice this year that when you look at a timetable and it says that the heat 3 of the 100 meters will be going off at 7:06. It goes off at 7:06, and that's that's really nice.
Yeah, definitely. No, it is, and it's cluttered, isn't it, with meetings in a normal season. I thought you were going to go down the route there of what perhaps has been really good, particularly for the younger athletes, is not having to chase English school standards, national championship qualifying standards, and their whole, particularly the first half of the season, maybe even more, is dominated by these pressures and these great unknowns where, on the distance running side, it can depend on all sorts of factors like conditions and things like that. So without all that, you've been able to prepare for races a little bit, pick and choose them to suit you, rather than what is the norm to do just because it's the norm to do. And that's been quite interesting, I think, to see how that's affected people. And some people have avoided it totally, not from any strategic reason, because they've taken the opportunity, well, I don't have to race. There's been no leagues, no championships. Phew, there's no pressure, so I won't race. Whereas others have thought, no, I'm going to take the opportunity. I'm going to find the right races for me. And because of the limited number of opportunities, going to create the best possible chance of performing well in those few and far competitions that between each other. So
yeah. Well, one thing I sort of discovered by it was by luck rather than design, really. But because a few of my athletes that really wanted to race were just struggling to get in early on, when the numbers were when we couldn't have 6 to a race, it was only 3. We kind of got into a bit of a culture with some of the group where basically as soon as an event came online, it sort of went on the WhatsApp, and everyone was sort of frantically trying to get in there. And as a result, we ended up with there were a few of them that ended up having kind of 3 races within sort of an 8-day period or something like that, which is never something I would plan for. But if you actually look at what a lot of the particularly the American pros do on the European circuit, we ended up sort of working kind of the way that they do, is they come over, have a quick flurry of a few races over the course of a week, 10 days, then kind of go back into hiding and train again, and kind of have that block of training, come out for a short race period, back into a block of training, come and race again. Which it's not something I'd ever thought of planning deliberately, but we ended up with it by accident, really, and it seemed to work really well. And it has made me sort of think. I'm not saying I definitely would do that in the future, but I certainly wouldn't rule it out now. And I think, as you touched on, there are sort of the established competitions, the English schools, the age group champs, the world champs trials, those sort of things, which becomes the sort of natural highlights of a season. And in the past, I've built everything around that, and then kind of gone mainly with sort of club commitments to fill the gaps before that. But it has sort of made me sort of think I probably will still focus on things like English schools, or for the older ones, the Olympic or world trials and things like that as the ultimate peak of the season. But along the way, maybe we'll have more kind of block of training, little intense block of competition, and see how that goes.
How do you? Here's a question for you for sprinting. Would you compare? I mean, everyone's different. I guess it's going to be the answer. But you've taken like Dina, Asher Smith, at the top of her game in 2019, performing phenomenally well. a global superstar, let alone British superstar now. You know, one of the favourites for the Olympics. The Olympics was postponed, and she basically said, "No, I'm not travelling around. I'm not going to race." Has done a few, you know, of her own little series of races at Bromley. And then you've got Adam Jamili, who pretty much, I think, followed the same sort of route. He actually won a Diamond League 200 in Stockholm, I think, in 20.6, way outside what his people were off. And he was laughing on TV last week about how he managed to fluke that one because he wasn't in shape and the standard wasn't that high compared to what he would expect. And then on the flip side, you've got somebody like Karsten Warholm, again, superstar last year, had two guys on his tail for challenging, you know, was it Benjamin and who was the other one, Samba?
Simbani. Yeah. I'm never sure how you pronounce his name.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there was three of them at the top of the game, and he's the only one who's come out this year and performed at 400 metre hurdle. So I think he's
it's the best season ever by a 400 hurdler.
Yeah,
by a mile.
I think he's even done quicker over 400 hurdles than the fastest Norwegian on the flat.
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah. So he's got out and he's attacked the world record on a number of times, and that's been clearly his intention. So you've got those two totally different ways, and the arguments go. Warholm will go into the winter thinking, I can win the Olympic gold. I'm still on form. I've had a great season still. I'm top of my game. Dina and Adam will be thinking, well, I haven't been at the top of my game, but that's particularly deliberate strategy. I'm invested. Will I be able to get it back? Will it be a wasted season, or will it actually play in their favour because they know what they're doing? They're professionals. They know how to prepare, and they'll come out all guns blazing and be better as a result of having a fallow year. It's completely different approaches to it.
Yeah. I don't know. I think for Warholm, one of the things that must have been on his mind was last year he was so close to the world record. I think if you're that close to it, if you were to have a year off and struggle to get back to that again, I think you'd always wonder what if. So that might have been part of it. Now, if Dina was knocking on the door of Flojo's record, would she have done the same thing? I don't know. That might have been sort of that might change your thinking, because I think Carson's got to know that he's in the absolute shape of his life, and yeah, it must be just there must be a worry of missing out. Surely, if you're that close to it, I mean, it'd be criminal if he didn't get the world record at some point in his career. Although I think Benjamin is going to give him a hell of a fight.
Well, if he got injured at any point out between now and the Olympics, people go, that's because he didn't back off. He kept pushing. And
yeah, that is the trade-off. I do always think though, I personally, my view is 400 hurdles is one of the events that is least affected by competition.
Yes.
Because I think competition is more likely to make you go wrong than make you do things right. Because particularly the first probably, I don't know, 6 hurdles or so, you want to be running your own pattern. You don't want to let anybody else be dictating what you do. And I think it was interesting. The hurdles conference was that last year. They had Kevin Young talking there, current world record holder, and he was saying, what these guys are doing wrong at the moment is they're getting way too excited at the start. They're going off way too hard. If you look at what they're running for the first 6 hurdles compared to what he was running, it's not until the end. If you had like kind of a like they did with Gabriel Selassie in the air attempt, if you had a hologram Kevin Young running alongside, he'd be behind them through the first part of the race. So it's. I think it may even be that he's benefited from not having that competition there alongside him, and he's been able to focus more on what he's doing himself. So I think it would have affected him less. I think for somebody who's knocking on the door of a 100-meter world record, if it might be that you need that pressure and you need that adrenaline of somebody around you to get that extra little bit out. That said, obviously when Bolt ran his, he was clear of everybody, so maybe I'm talking rubbish.
No, the other bit that goes through my mind, because they closed the window of opportunity to get an Olympic qualifying time, all these performances have not counted for anything in that respect. Now, that's fine, but then you look at the period next year to get the qualifying time, and when the British trials will probably be in June, I guess, again, you know, as they were scheduled, I think, originally this year. So there's going to be this frantic effort by people to get qualifying times or fast times or high up the world rankings next year in that period, well, April to June. You know, it's going to be against what you were just saying. I know you were talking about somebody who's still at school or whatever, but it's like going for the English schools qualifying time. They've got to do it early season because they haven't had this season to do it. So you take James West from Tunbridge, who ran what would have been an Olympic qualifying time last week of 3:34 for 1,500 metres. Didn't count. So now he's going to go get the qualifying time to put him in a good position to go to the Olympics. I mean, it does depend on where he is in the world rankings, how he does in the trials. There's caveats there where you can qualify. But essentially, he'd want to be coming out and getting an Olympic qualifying time, either in the indoors, which is allowed, which there won't be an indoors probably, by the looks of it, or very early season, you know. Yeah. And that throws that's another complication to it all.
Yeah, absolutely. I suppose you've just got to hope that because obviously his performance last week, and then obviously he's got a good opportunity in Doha as well. Good race there. Got to hope that the performances there are going to at least ensure that he gets the invites to the decent races early next season to give him that opportunity. And he's not trying to run a world qualifying in a Southern League somewhere. Don't think that's very likely.
No. Okay. Yeah. That's an interesting one. And then we've had one of the successes in my group was a young lad who he was due to go. Well, he's just gone to university now, but he had a year out. And part of his plans for the year out, having done a really, for him, very consistent winter's training, got into good shape. He's an 800-meter runner, essentially, as Charlie Crick. And at his best ever sort of winter, had all these growing pains and injuries and settled down in that respect. But he was going to go travelling in April and wipe out the whole track season. And he's never really done himself justice. Yet that was all cancelled, of course, and he stayed home and trained quite diligently and sensibly for the first time ever in his life, and smashed his PB. He's improved immensely and has gone off to university, sort of reinvigorated with athletics, and looking forward to improving even more. And that wouldn't have happened without the pandemic. So it's been a stroke of luck for some people in that, as far as their athletics is concerned. Yeah, say it because he missed out on a good trip around the world or whatever he was doing. But it can help people, and I've noticed particularly before people went back to work or school or got ready for university, etc. There was a lot of people that were living a better lifestyle early in lockdown, more rest, eating better, not rushing around, less stressed. All these things come into play that support their training. And there was definitely a lift up in how they were training. And then we saw that when they started racing.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it was really impressive the sort of what good shape people were in when they sort of in those first races of the year. Particularly some of the the ones that are running up in Nuneaton, on the sprint side of things, I was genuinely quite shocked just how well people were doing, sort of, right from out the gate. I think it's been interesting on that front, definitely.
Do you think, just from your group's point of view, I'd like to think it is in my group, it's made people appreciate their sport more, because they've missed.
Yeah, I think that's definitely true, and I think what you were saying about that early phase of lockdown. I think especially then, because I think when people were kind of pretty much confined to their houses, that chance to go out for the hour or whatever it was to get out and train. I think they really, really enjoyed that. It was a real sort of sense of relief. But then again, there was another sort of another aspect, the social aspect to it. I think they kind of, again, really appreciated that, and I don't think they necessarily realise what a big part that plays in their sort of athletics experience until it's taken away. I think it's something that's just so easily taken for granted. But no, I think it's done people good to have a chance to miss those things. So I think it's been good.
Yeah.
In terms of the competitions and things that we've been involved in, you've actually put on you put on the meet at Bromley. When was that? It was about 3 weeks ago now, 4 weeks. I've lost track.
It's the 21st of August, wasn't it?
21st of August. Okay, it's longer ago than I thought now. But obviously that was a massive success, and I think it was the performances that came out of that, I think, were really impressive. I mean, it's been surpassed slightly now, but I did quite enjoy those pictures of screenshots of the world rankings from 3,000 meters.
Yeah,
where was it the top four in the world all from all from that meet?
Yeah, it's a bit bewildering, really, because those. I mean, I don't want to just pick on that 3,000 meters, but I've seen results since, Diamond League results, women's 800 results, for example, and you think, actually, Kai Malanga ran 2:01 at Bromley in the women's, what was the B race, and that would have finished her third in, I think it was the Stockholm Diamond League 800 meters. And you think, how's this happened? What's happened? It's I think there was definitely a feeling from athletes. They hadn't. It was before the British Champs. It was about 2 weeks before the British Champs, wasn't it? And I think people were coming out. They were only going to race if they were in good shape. I mean, nobody came out and was completely out of condition.
Yeah.
And didn't know what to expect. So people were up for it, and I think perhaps certainly it was a chance for some to qualify themselves for the British Champs. So they were going to try and, for want of a better word, shit or bust, if you like, to try and qualify. And that happened to a few people who perhaps would never have got to a British Champs, because British Champs invites were going out, people were turning them down. So they extended outside the initial qualifications. So there was a few like that got in, and I think people certainly took advantage. I think in the distance running, with only 5 in a race, well, 6 if you didn't have a pacemaker, it meant that the fields were very closely matched. If somebody was slightly, take Phil Sessamon in the slowest guy in the 3,000 A race, who'd done 7:55 before. Johnny Davis had done 7:50. Well, actually, Emil Cress hadn't broken 8 minutes, but no, not Emil Cress. It was Alex Yee, sorry. And Alex, we know, could run quick because he'd done 13:20 something for 5,000. You got Mark Scott and James West, who'd done 7:43 and 7:47. But so you went from 7:43 to 7:55 basically, and that's 12 seconds. It's quite a lot at that level. So if somebody like Phil's going into it, and I spoke to him beforehand and his coach, and said, "How are you going to view this? Are you going to be all right following this pace? Because you didn't want them scattered over 50 meters."
No, if there's sort of 20 in a field, then it looks all right. But, yeah.
And Johnny Davis, both of them said, "No, we're gonna hang on. We're gonna try and hang on." And that was it. Their mindset was, I'm going to hang on for dear life. The pacing was brilliant. 61 point per lap. And they did it. They hung on. Phil lost a bit over the last 250 metres, but he still ran a 3-second PB. And the others ran brilliantly. As you said, top 4 in the world at the time. But I think the mindset was different with just 5 in a race. You can hide a bit when there's 20, but you can't hide 5.
No, absolutely. So it's obviously kind of the seeding of the different heats is sort of key to that. Like I say, that was, I think, universally regarded as a big success for that meet. What do you think are the key things to make a meet successful?
It's interesting, actually, because I'm now getting my first experience, not directly, but indirectly through James West, of what happens at European meetings and Diamond League meetings, and how agents are trying to get people into races, and how athletes and agents are left scratching their heads. Well, how come he's in the race and I'm not? And I've said to James, look, I'm not experienced in this, but there'll be all sorts of dealings going on. If you can get him in, I'll offer you him. That sort of thing, or her. And it's not as clear cut as just putting the fastest runners in there. Because if you're representing, I don't know, Carsten Warholm as an example, and you've got 2 other average hurdlers, Carsten will do your race, but I want these 2 in. You're going to say, well, I'll stick those 2 in, aren't you? And others will be left scratching their heads. So there's all sorts of things going on there. With the meeting that I put on, I spent time making sure that people were getting. It's very difficult because you had people that hadn't raced all through 2020 coming out to race, and you got others that had raced a little bit in leading up to it, and you had to make judgment calls over who you thought was in shape or not. And what I found was, especially the distance runners who hadn't got the opportunity because there was only races up to 800, was to say to them and the coaches that were involved, come on, be honest. What do you think? And I can remember, having some conversations with the athlete, and the athlete would say, can you take into consideration my PB for whatever it is, 5,000, because it looks better than the 3,000? Yeah, okay, I'll do that. But then as the names started adding to the list, I then went back to the coach and said, come on, what do you really think he's capable of? And the coaches were brilliant and being honest and saying, well, he might think he can do that, but I don't think he can at the moment, to be fair. Or he has the potential to do that, but you have to go on what he's actually done. And they were very supportive, and that made it easy. Yeah. It's easy to do it. And so I was in some situations where I knew somebody was on fire, so you put them in a race above somebody who's got a better PB, perhaps. And that really helped, because I think the C race for the 3,000 metres was won by Mark Pierce from Birmingham University in 8 minutes 0.5.
He was very close, wasn't he, to breaking that magic 8.
So people like Luke Gunn were terrific in giving feedback. And Johnny Davis has had an up and down career, and put him in the A race. I checked with Luke. I said, come on, what shape's he in? He said, I think he's in the form of his life. And he was. So if he said, well, actually, I have some doubts he can run that pace. And no coach would really want to throw an athlete into an event where they're going to be embarrassed.
No. I think especially as well, because you are able to offer those B, C, D races as well. I think, it's in everyone's best interests to be honest, so that you actually get a well-packed field. Yeah.
The difficulty was with the ruling as such that you could only have, if you had a pacer in, it would basically take one athlete out. So I had this dilemma of giving as many athletes a chance to race, but at the same time, certainly with some races, you wanted a pacer in there to help them, because it's not easy running sub 8 minutes for 3,000.
No.
And nobody's, some poor athlete's going to be stuck in front, looking behind, doing the pacing for others. And it's tough then. And that was the only thing that 3 of the 4 men's races had pacers. And with the women's races, I could put in a male pacer to help out because there wasn't any
There's no qualification.
Yeah, which really helps. So generally, it went well from that perspective. I felt a bit guilty because there was 2 or 3 in the slowest men's 3,000 who could have probably gone quicker with some help, but it would have meant not having one of them in the race.
Yeah.
That was a dilemma there. But going back to your original question, I think having that sort of dialogue with coaches, athletes, and being very open with, you touched on it, you're entering open races and you don't know how many people are going to be there and who's going to be there. We started the framework with some basic events and a timetable, but left a little bit of leeway to add in where the demand was coming from, quality demand was coming from. So I added a couple of extra races in there, like a women's B800, an extra women's 3,000, because that's where I could see good reasons for putting them on to help, you know, good quality athletes achieve what they wanted to do.
Yeah. Obviously, the other big twilight meet on your, I don't know, competition management CV, let's call it, was the Tunbridge Twilight one last year, which obviously was very different in terms of we were allowed to have those sort of big crowds and things there.
Yeah.
But I think one of the big things about that night was just the atmosphere. I wasn't able to go to Bromley, but how did you have much of an atmosphere, or was that something that was just not really possible given the numbers?
Well, I particularly invited Peter Scott, who comes down with his music box, so he put dancing and music. That always helps. I think
more outfits than you would believe possible. I don't know where he keeps them all.
Yeah,
he's got a storage locker somewhere just for his outfits.
Yeah, he's all right as long as he doesn't pick on you for an interview or to get you to join in his dancing or anything like that. So you keep well clear of him on the night, but he does add to the atmosphere. I think, the difference between the Tunbridge meeting and the Bromley meeting was that the Bromley was just focused on distance racing, as you know, in the end. The original plan was to put on some sprints, but it did mean, although you've got a limited number of spectators there, everybody understood the events that were going on.
Yeah.
And were interested in every single race. And so there was quite a few students there, student age type people who were genuinely excited because they knew they knew somebody in every race, so they were engaged. And what was really nice was that some of the old stalwart coaches were there, been around for a long, long time. Quite a few people like Matt Yates, Chris McGeorge, there was Richard Murica there. These are guys that have been to World Olympic Championships, and they were genuinely excited by it. So that was good, and it does make me think that it's a great sport because of the diversity. All shapes, sizes, ages, everybody can do. There's something for everybody, isn't there? But it is a lot of sports within a sport, and sometimes you probably find if you go to a sprints meeting, you get to know people, you get to be able to exchange views with other coaches, all the athletes involved. There's genuine excitement because this athlete's up against another athlete. And same, I guess, and I would appreciate if you had a hammers, a throws fest, you get the people that are really engaged in those events there and a lot of expertise around and enthusiasm around. And I think that is something that works quite well. Whereas, let's face it, team managers at Tunbridge, might be managing the UK Junior League or Youth Development League. They might be multi-events coach, but when the men's 3,000's on, they're going to have their cup of tea. That's what it. And I won't be interested in some of the other events, and that's just the way of the world, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think there's something to be thought about there. That's
yeah, and I mean it's something that I've been thinking about a bit myself this summer is for events I might want to put on in the future, and I think in the way that you've done sort of these at Bromley, you had that sort of distance focused one. I quite like the idea of putting on a sprints focused thing, and maybe looking at doing things a bit differently in terms of I know in one of my lads went over to Poland and did a race, a competition out there where the prize money was based on, I don't think it was cumulative time of the 100 and 200, but I think they used IAAF points tables, things like that, to do it and think. But that sort of idea, starting to look at how you can make it more than just a one-off race and things like that, and get a bit of drama about the day.
Yeah.
So I suppose actually thinking about it, when you're saying about having that one event only, or one event group only, we have that to an extent with some of the indoor 60-meter races, because obviously they're held in facilities that's the only thing that they can do there. And I've never really thought about it before, but I think you're right that you do get a bit more. I think there's nobody just standing around really. Everybody's watching, because everybody can relate to what's going on the track, because they either do that event themselves or they're there supporting somebody that does that event. So I think you're absolutely right. Everybody understands it.
Yeah, it's like you go to the national under 20 and 23 championships. You'll have periods where all the hurdles and sprints on, and all the distance running coaches go and have a cup of tea, and then vice versa. We get I get excited watching the heats, or the first round of 3 of the Bucks 1500 meters, for example. I mean, how many multi-event coaches would be interested in that? But you do, because some of the people involved. You understand sort of tactics involved and what's gone into be able to compete in those events. It's just, I think it does. And if you're putting on a sprints only meeting, I'd still go and help and support. And it'd be, because it's good seeing people that are passionate about their bit of the sport involved in something. I think it's getting a buzz from it. And I think sometimes it just gets so diluted when it's multi events and distances.
I think the thing that's a bit of a challenge, and I think it's we've seen it this year. Oh, sorry, Martin.
My wife came in and I just sort of shut the door to the room.
I think one of the things that has been a challenge this year, and it's the thing I don't really know what to do about, in terms of if we were to have any sort of innovation moving towards that sort of thing, is those more niche events, how you fit those in. Because the beauty of leagues is that, say hurdles events, where you don't necessarily get that many people that do them, the leagues present one of the few opportunities to do them, because you can kind of guarantee that there is going to be, a 400 hurdles race. It's really hard to find 400 hurdles races at open meets. And I can completely sympathise with event organisers, because it's one of the less popular events, so you're not necessarily going to have as many people that do it. And it's a real hassle putting all those hurdles out. And, it takes time out of the programme. So I can completely sympathise with organisers to why they don't necessarily want to put them on. But it does make it quite hard to find your races. And I had one athlete this year who's desperately been looking for a sprint hurdles race, and she's one of the younger age groups. And so whilst there have been opportunities for older athletes, there just haven't for her. And she's had 2 so far, and she's looking at 1 more, and that's it all this season. And she had to travel all the way over to Yate to get one of them. It was overnight in a hotel just to go and do an 11.5 second race. So it's, I don't know what the best way forward is with that, really.
I think, as you were talking, I was listening this morning to Let'sRun.com podcast, and they were talking about Cornelius Kitruto, the steeplechaser, who's actually running a 1,500 meters in his first race of the season at the Doha Diamond League this evening. And his PB is 3:39, so he's not in the same class. He could probably go quicker, but his PB is 3:39. And apparently, his agent has been trying to get steeplechases put on to attack even the world record in Europe. And meat promoters weren't prepared to do it. Now, some of that is the hassle of getting the field together. A lot of Kenyans involved, and then you've got visas and the the COVID security aspects coming in from Kenya, etc. I think have added complications there. But yeah, there are certain events that perhaps have suffered as a result of all this, made it more difficult and has not been as appealing. And I think then, if you're talking about Britain or say England next year, if you wanted to get an opportunity for hurdlers, you've really got to engage with some of the top guys, because if you've got, say, the British 400 meter hurdling, there's some very closely matched athletes, particularly on the male side. I think, there's some pretty closely matched on the women's side as well. So if you could get 4 or 5 of the top male and 4 or 5 of the top men to commit to doing a meeting, it creates that buzz around that, and then you could put on some others around. And we've had 1 or 2 who are steeplechasers who like the opportunity of doing a 400 hurdles, and so you could get the odd crossover like that, and you might even get, if you staggered the levels, you might even get the odd 400 meter flat runner trying their hurdles for the first time, later in the season or something like that. I think you've got to appeal, but the carrot will be that there's some good performers there. And it's almost going back to what we were talking about, the pole vaulters earlier, where if they do, they've got to see they're doing their bit for the sport as well as for themselves, and willing to commit to racing in Britain, each other, because they're going to inspire a few other people that are watching. You might have to reward them a little bit for doing it, but I think it's worthwhile.
Yeah, it would be good to see more going on here, and I think we've, particularly during the early stages of the return to competition, we saw a lot of the top guys and girls racing domestically, which they perhaps wouldn't have done in other years. So I think that's sort of been good. And I think was also interesting, I noticed the other day, Chris McAllister, who's running for the UKA Athletes Commission at the moment. I think the full manifestos, I gather, have only actually gone out to eligible voters, but I think I saw a screenshot of some of it. And he was there talking about having, about really pushing that sort of that higher level of domestic competition. And I think, it's, hopefully those sort of messages, we're getting more of that. And this year has perhaps encouraged more people to sort of think, it's quite nice to go and have go and be able to run a 49-second 400 hurdles, within the country without having to sort of, pop on the Eurostar or whatever. So
I honestly, what's going through my head, and I probably need somebody who's better at it than I am, but for want of a better phrase, a crowdfunding or just giving or that equivalent fund set up to go towards, say we had 3 meetings, specialist meetings going on next year. I mean, there's lots of complications with it in picking the date. You don't know the calendar. You don't know what's going on with the virus. But say there was, a throws fest here, a sprints fest here, and a distance running fest here, and it was clearly defined what we'd like to do in terms of putting prize money up. I am almost certain if you had a crowdfunding for this and a crowdfunding for that, all the pots will go towards these specific things, prizes or whatever. You would raise a fair bit of money to finance it. People would chip in a £5 or a £10 to do it, and it could be done. Plus a little bit on the gate, perhaps. I think you've said it so many times to me and others that our sport is so cheap. We all do it for the love of it rather than get something out of it. But it's nice. It's good to ask these athletes to do it for the sport, the widest benefits of the sport. But why should they do it as individuals? They all should get something out of it as well. And I've always been banging on about that. This year's Bromley meeting was slightly different, but Tunbridge meeting last year, I was so determined that we would actually look after the athletes we invited. So those that needed some expenses or looking after in a hotel got that, and there was some prize money, not a huge amount, but enough to make it a little bit interesting to them.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I mean, I know some of the money on the Continental Tour that's involved now, you know, it's decent. You know, you can see why Laura Muir is doing 3 races in 5 or 6 days. There's decent prize money there, and you've got to face that a little bit as well. But
yeah,
to me, it would create a lot of excitement. It would get British athletes racing in Britain. There would be a lot more engagement in the particular events that you're putting on, because it's more specialist and more focused rather than just like every possible event. And I think it would be really good. The big difficulty we've got if we get back to normal is we don't know what's going to change in terms of the athletics calendar. So I think most people agreed it was so cluttered and not meaningful enough. There's no like progression from county to regional to national or anything like that. And I was going to say the British champs. I don't know what you thought, but I thought it was one of the best British champs there's been for a long time. The smaller arena, more intimate. There seemed a lot more. The BBC seemed a lot more aware of what was going on. You know, even in the heats and who the people were. It seemed much better presented in that respect. I think it was, the viewing figures, even for the Friday night, were high.
Is it 1.4 million? I think something like that.
More on BBC Two watching the heats of the 800 metres than we're watching ITV or BBC One that evening. Sean Malloy says it's because he was in the men's 800 metre heat.
I'm sure that's what it was.
Yeah, but whatever.
I agree though. Yeah. I completely agree. I think it was. It seemed to suit the venue, and what I thought was really nice, and I think whilst there was a lot of criticism for some of the bigger, more established names not doing it, I think what that opened up was it opened up the focus to be on the competition rather than on the individuals. And I think that's what the coverage has missed for so long. I think we had so much time that, if you normally watch a British champs, say Laura Muir's there, the entire focus is on what Laura Muir is doing.
Yeah,
it's not on the race, and that's no fault of hers. I'm a big fan of Laura Muir, I should clarify, but it's just with the absence of some of the bigger names, it sort of forced the focus to be on the actual competition, that's where the real interest is. And I hope that the production teams of things have learned their lesson from that, because if you were to take that sort of style of production and that style of focus of commentary and those sort of things and apply it to a competition where you do have all those big names as well, then I think we'd have an amazing show on our hands.
Yeah, and I think there was, I might be wrong, I just got the impression there was a little bit more discussion about the circumstances of the athletes and how they coped with training up until the end of August through the previous 4 months of the pandemic, and a little bit about their background, a little bit more awareness that they're not fantastically paid superstars. They're doing it around normal things, normal life,
indeed,
jobs. And I think that was good to come out of it. And some of those people are known to a greater degree as a result of it, because they had a little bit of the attention on them rather than superstars.
Yeah, well, I think Hannah England was a brilliant addition to the commentary team on that front, because I think she has competed at the very highest level, won medals at the very highest level herself, but she is very, very aware of what the sport is like at that sub-elite level as well, and she knows those athletes, she knows their stories, and I think she was able to tap into that in a way that maybe some of the other commentators haven't been able to in the past.
Yeah, because she's very involved. I mean, Birmingham, at the student level, for example, a lot of those students were stepping up, weren't they? People that have recently graduated into the British Championships arena. And I mean, our sport is fantastic, because if you don't know somebody directly, you know somebody who knows that person. And so news spreads or awareness spreads very easily. And I think that's very positive when it comes to something like that. And Hannah seems to be really enjoying her retirement. Having spoken to her at Bromley, she was so upbeat and positive about competition coming back, and she's so interested and respectful of athletes and coaches and setups. I think that awareness is good when it comes to the commentary box.
No, completely. So, good stuff. Right, well, should we wrap it up there? Okay, well, it's a really good chat, and no, I think it's definitely been an interesting year on the COVID front. But I think, as we're sort of saying, I think definitely some lessons to be learned, and hopefully we can kind of take them into the future and have an even better sport in the future years. So, fab. Okay, well, thanks very much, Mark.
You're going to wrap it up with where you can find us?
I can do. I've got a pre-recorded bit that I just plug on the end now. I just edit it off. But for anybody watching on the YouTube channel, so it won't make it onto there. On both Facebook and Instagram, just search for Track Coach Clubhouse and you'll find us on there. Or if you want to email in any suggestions about what we might want to talk about in future episodes, that sort of thing, just email trackcoachclubhouse@outlook.com.
Okay, great. Thanks very much, Andy.
No problems.
Very right.